Good morning, Robbie.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. I'm doing good.
Do you want to talk to us a little bit about your history with Charles Dickens and A Christmas Carol as an adapter, actor, director, film director now?
film director now. Yeah, sure. Um, the first play I ever did was in junior high school. It was an English writing assignment, which was to do a little mini Christmas Carol. And Scrooge was my first part when I was like 11. Not that I knew anything about what we were writing about or talking about. That was years later, but um, I guess my relationship with this play and this book really started in earnest when I did my first production with the San Diego Rep in, where was that, 82 maybe, 1982. It was their big production where they moved from the church, the chapel on 6th Avenue, they moved to the California Theater. They had done that show for 20 plus years. Every year, about every 3 years, they would completely change the adaptation. The script was largely the same, but the context was changed. One of the things that I learned pretty early on in working on that script came through Doug Jacobs, who adapted that script for years. And it was his passion to make sure that the book was well represented on stage, that you took Dickens' message seriously. That I learned that there's so much in that novel that transcends Christmas. Christmas is a trap in a way. It sort of makes you feel like you're watching a Christmas story, but what Dickens was trying to do was trying to push forward a political activism. He was pushing for human rights, for children's labor rights. There's a lot of very important stuff that is embedded, sometimes subtly, sometimes not so subtly, into that book. And I think because of that, it can transcend being a Christmas story and really become a bit of Dickens giving us a way forward. The book was written in the early 1840s, and it was about the time England was beginning to go into its big transition in the industrial age. You had a lot of people moving from the country into the cities for work, which meant the cities became crowded. You had multiple families in the same unit, and poverty was everywhere. There really weren't very many rights established to help workers. It was an employer's world, and Dickens, his family was one of those families that got caught up in poverty. His father was a gambler. His father spent money on a lot of lavish things, and his family ended up in these poorhouses on many occasions. Dickens himself, as a young boy, was in the workhouses. And so his personal experience was built around that, how hard poverty can be on people, on their spirits, on their families, and how difficult to get out of it. So when Scrooge says things like, well, are there no workhouses? Are there no prisons? Are there no treadmills? The poor law, the government established these organizations to supposedly help the poor. Many of them created this sort of vicious circle where if you were too poor to pay off your debts, you were put into the poorhouse and you weren't allowed to leave until you paid off your debts, but now you're in a poorhouse, so you can't. So people got caught in the system. But if you look at Scrooge and his beliefs, and if you try to take out sort of the humorous miser out of it and look at what is he actually saying, who does he represent? And he was based on a real person that everybody knew at the time. He's basically advocating for let the government handle it. Every person should just protect themselves. They should work for themselves. is, he says, it's not my business what happens to other people. It's hard enough to know what I have to do, let alone what they have to do. Let them go to the workhouses. That's why we created them. It's true, it's practical, but it's not very human, and there's no empathy or sympathy or warmth or care for people around you. So on the one hand, I think Dickens is trying to use Scrooge to wake people up to the people around them. And that's ultimately what the end of the story is Scrooge did better than his word. He did all these things, and Dickens kind of names them all the different things that Scrooge did after this very odd night that he has, where now he has decided to take care of his employee, which before he didn't barely know his name. He decides to take care of his employee's family. He starts giving money to charity. He starts saying, I have to catch up on lost time. And what I can do is I can make people's lives better. And I don't think he ever really thought about that based on the way he grew up.
Mm. I think that's a beautiful connection from Victoria, England to today. Do you do you find what other themes of the play do you think resonate with people? Why is this the one of the most performed plays now in the canon?
Well, I think, first of all, it's very rich. So just in terms of putting it on stage, it requires so much imagination that it will be challenging to find two productions of A Christmas Carol doing something the same way, because it's always about how you want to bring the magic to that story alive. But I also think, like, over the many hundred plus years that the book has been out, different time periods latched onto different parts of the book. Different themes would rise up to the surface. In late Victorian England, early Edwardian England, the focus was on the character of Fred, Scrooge's nephew, who in our version isn't even in the story for time purposes mostly. But that was about people who are of the same class, people who are of reunited family, the benefits of having a good upper middle class family. It sort of reinforced all of those great Edwardian ideas about, government is best when the family is strong, that sort of thing. As time progressed and we hit a depression in the 1930s, if you look at the film versions that start coming out in the 30s, they all start to emphasize Bob Cratchit, the employee, the guy who's trying to raise his kids with no money, and his relationship with his employer and work. There becomes almost a social responsibility question that rises up to the surface now in the 1930s, when everybody's talking about, breadlines and families with no money, and putting the emphasis on Cratchit. Then it becomes an employee-employer relationship, and how it's the employer's responsibility to take care of those who work, the workers of the country, the necessary employees. In the 60s, there was a bit more of a sense of the almost psychedelic part of it, the ghosts, the travel. I mean, if you look at those movies, the Albert Finney movies that he did, and those versions of it, it's a more kind of fantastical story. So I think that every time finds its thing in there that becomes relevant. And in filming it, one of the things that really struck me in a kind of profound way, there is that moment when Christmas Present reveals these two children that huddle and hang on to him. The boy is ignorance and the girl is want. And he tells Scrooge, beware this boy. On that which is on his brow is written doom, and unless that writing be erased, the world's doomed. And I started thinking about his warning that if we don't address ignorance, we're doomed. As we're watching, I'm sorry, but we're watching people who refuse to wear a simple little face mask because they don't believe in it, and that ignorance is killing people. And that made me very sad when we were filming that day, because it hit me like in a blast, what Dickens was warning us about. You could apply that to nuclear arms. You can apply it to hunger. You can apply it to poverty. There's all these things that if we ignore that thing, I see that which is written doom. And so there's some pretty intense messaging that goes on in in the book. And the book is so rich and so there's so much there, you can't put it all into an adaptation. So you have to start trying to sort of let the things you want to say rise to the top. And I encourage everyone to read that book. It's not very long, and it is a profound, wonderful, funny, moving, heartbreaking journey to redemption.
I think that for me is always what resonates is this idea of forgiveness. No matter how far we've gone in our life, we there's always a chance for redemption if we find it within ourselves. And I think that's such a beautiful message. Something you were talking about, which I didn't realize, was that Dickens himself performed a lot of his writings as a one man show. So the first productions of it were a one man show.
With him, and mostly just him. Absolutely. Almost within a year, the book was an almost immediate success. He wrote it because he had written Martin Chuzzlewit, which was a book that nobody wanted to read, and he was really facing some bad financial situations. So he wanted to write something that he could make money on. He did something unheard of the time, and he published it himself. He turned away from his publishers. He spent way too much money on the first edition. It's red leather bound with gold leaf and hand painted, but almost immediately that book resonated with people. Christmas was, in the 1840s, a sort of quaint country holiday. It wasn't anything like what it has become. When you look at the journey that Scrooge takes to Christmas past, the language of that particular stave is all about, it's all in the style of sentiment and nostalgia. The poor little orphan boy working his way through the system, and you see all of these beautiful Christmas celebrations. The Fezziwig dance is sort of a nostalgic nod to the past if you were living in 1840. That's something that you're probably not seeing a lot of because most of those people have moved from those places and now live in the city.
I know that you focused on that idea in your stage adaptation of the family, the hearth, that idea of bringing Christmas from the country. What did you focus on when you decided to do a film adaptation of it? But before you answer that, can you tell the viewers what a stave means?
Sure. It's a little thing that he does. The song, A Christmas Carol, that is a song, which the book is named after, each verse is called a stave. And so there's many verses to a lot of the famous Christmas carols we know that we have never heard because, like, God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen may have like 20 staves. We sing the first two, So he's naming each chapter of the book after a movement in A Christmas Carol. In terms of staging it, I realized this morning I was thinking about it's the fourth script that I've done. And because you had asked me earlier, like, how do you go about adapting it each time if you've done it many times? And so it is about sort of looking at the story, looking at who are you telling it to, what do you want them to get out of it, how do you need to tell that story for them to get it, the message of it, and then what are the circumstances in which you're producing it. So is it a big production? Is it a little production? Is it intimate production? Is it a Christmas pageant full of big puppets and singing and dancing? Is it a musical? I mean, we've seen all of these versions of this story out there. And, the very first production we did of Christmas Carol was our first production in Old Town. And it was trying to really take on this new theater and see what can we do? What can we do? So it was bigger, much bigger cast. It was straightforward. It wasn't a musical. It was beautiful. After that first production, we started realizing if we're going to do this every year, that means we're putting up this huge show every year. Do we want to do that? So when we did the second version of it, it evolved out of our It's a Wonderful Life, which we had done for 6 years. It was a radio It was set in a radio studio in the 40s. It was a lot of Foley sound effects. It was off the different techniques that you use to tell radio stories in the 30s and 40s. And so that was a lot of fun. And after about 6 years, we're like, well, let's see if we swap out the play they're doing, but not the environment. So we kept the sound studio, we had the microphones, and we wrote our own adaptation of A Christmas Carol as if this fictional company that had been doing Wonderful Life are doing a new script. The part I didn't like about it is it kept the actors from really being able to engage with each other because they had to do it through a microphone. So we thought, well, maybe we need to make it a musical. So Billy Thompson, who wrote the score, we decided, well, let's take out some of the songs we had written for the radio version, and let's now put musical numbers into the radio version. Now it's a musical radio show. And then that I thought really worked, but now the problem to me was I really wanted them out from behind those mics. So the third year we said, now let's just do it, and let's get rid of the sound studio, and let's do it as a mounted production. But we held on to the idea of a very small ensemble of using Foley sound effects and puppetry in order to, again, not give the audience all the visuals, but to give them enough tools to create them in their own minds. And we tinkered with that over the years. We added some more songs. We kept fleshing it out where it felt like we wanted it to lighten up or get heavier. And so it was a lot of fun. But always trying to keep the story told to that unlikely but hopeful one person in the audience who's never heard it before. So you got to tell that story to them so that they get it on the first time. So when the pandemic hit and we realized we can't bring people in here into the theater, we didn't want to vacate that tradition that we had started for people. And so putting our heads together, we thought that we could film. First, we thought we'd try to film the show we did before, but there are too many people involved in it, too big a cast. It was too dangerous to try to get people into the room to do that. So we decided to film a version of it ourselves. And due to the restrictions of the pandemic and also the restrictions of a budget, we decided a one-man show would probably be the most affordable. And since I have a relationship with the script and with the story, we decided that I should be the one that tells that story. And so the focus of that script is a pretty pared down version, but the style of the film that we're making and the hopes for it is that we build a one-on-one relationship between the storyteller and the viewer, so that, again, there are less special effects in our version than in the non-special effects version that we did live. I mean, there really are no special effects. It's all in camera angles and lighting and how we tell the story. And we're being really conscious about that because I still think that the most vivid version of A Christmas Carol is the one that's in my mind after having read the book. And it will never be able to be filmed or staged. It's in my mind, and when you read the book, your film version in your head is going to be untouchable. So don't try to touch it. Try to just nod and push and move you towards a place where the imagery comes to you. It becomes your version. So that's why this version is one-on-one. We're gathering around the ghost light, which is a bit of our metaphor for a campfire or sitting around a fire at home and telling each other ghost stories. You know, which is, again, why the film is in black and white. It's so that the shadows tell a story. The shapes are more important in black and white. If it's in color, you're starting to tell things that you don't intend to tell, like look at the beautiful red seats in the theater and all that. It's not about that. It's about look at the empty seats in the theater.
Can you talk about that moment? Because I know that was a big moment of hope and for you when you saw the empty seats.
Yeah, well, part of putting the adaptation together was to figure out where are we going to film it. And we knew that this empty theater was empty, and we knew that we were going to keep an extremely small crew. most of us were out in the audience in masks, so they weren't in view. We did all the precautions we had to take. The theater, to me, as I sat in it, looking at this beautiful set for La Cage aux Folles, which Sean Fanning designed, which only got the privilege of performing one preview, and we had to close the show. But it sits here 9 months later, and the whole building in a way becomes a metaphor to me of the pandemic, and how a room that is designed to be filled with people who are sharing an experience, who are communing with the artists, with each other, who've chosen particular moment in time to all assemble to examine a story, whatever the story is. The laughter, the warmth, the friendships, the crying, the challenges, the entertainment, all of those things that this room was designed to hold is just abandoned right now. It's a big room that had life in it and has the potential to have life in it again, who at the moment is sitting as a big, quiet ghost in a way. And for me, the theater then became a metaphor for Scrooge, that he is like that theater. He did have people in his life before the book. We go back and visit some of those people. He has shut his doors. He has closed things. Nobody's allowed in to his heart, his home, his office. And he's like some guy kind of crouching in the corner of a big empty theater saying, I don't care how many seats there are, stay out. I don't need you. There's a moment at the end of it, which to me I find very moving. And it's the very last line, the famous line, Tiny Tim says, God bless us, everyone. And our camera then does a nice slow pan of the big empty 250 seats that require attendance. And it's just, to me, it was like a cry for that time when we can all get back together.